All right, everybody, you're back in Jeff's kitchen, and we've got a couple of great recipes for you today. Um, One of them is a twofold recipe. The other one is one of my favorites. It's a one pan chickpea, farro, and bean skillet, and it's just real herby, real aromatic, and super easy. If you're not familiar with farro, it's a whole grain. It happens to be super delicious. It's a little bit like barley, but I would call it chewier, maybe a little bit of a nuttiness to it. But before we get started, I want to talk to you about two things. One, I have my PBNSG shirt on today. PBNSG is a Southeast Michigan-based nonprofit organization. PBNSG stands for the Plant-Based Nutrition Support Group. We have large group meetings about 6 times a year, bring in some of the top doctors from around the country to talk about plant-based nutrition. We've had Dr. Michael Greger, Dr. Michael Clapper, Dr. Garth Davis, a whole slew of people, Dr. T. Colin Campbell a number of times. So that's one thing that we do. The other thing that's really cool about PBNSG is we have a monthly plant-based potluck that's in local communities. So it's a small group. People bring a whole food, plant-based, oil-free dish to pass and the recipe. Lists out allergens if you have allergies to wheat and things like that. But they are 100% plant-based and 100% oil-free. We've talked about oil-free cooking in past videos. Part of the reason for that is we know that it's very calorie dense. It's actually as calorie dense as butter. 1 tablespoon of olive oil is about 130 plus calories and 25 grams of fat. So pretty unnecessary, and it's unnecessary to cook with it. I showed you a little bit about how I did that in the last video or two that we did about how to saute with just a little bit of water, a little bit of vegetable broth. I'll link my article down in the video description. So it tells you why olive oil isn't necessarily good for you. That basically is stripped of nutrients, and for 1 tablespoon of olive oil, it takes 44 olives, and that's a lot of olives. So just eat the olives. It's good, healthy fat, but when it's stripped of its fiber, it's pretty useless. So, so that's one thing I wanted to mention to you. pbmsg.org is the website. You're welcome to go on there and sign up for a local small group. There's one in Ann Arbor, there's one in Canton, there's one in Saline that I run that you're welcome to come to. There's none in Ypsilanti. As of right now, there is one in Toledo as well. But there's over 50 of them, I think, across the state. And now we've expanded across the country. So lots of opportunity to get involved with the organization. And I would highly encourage it. I've learned a lot. One of the cool things about the potlucks is that you get to try a lot of dishes that you wouldn't have otherwise, and you might find some recipes that you really like. So that's the big benefit. They also have a cookbook out, perfectly plant-based, which I have about 6 recipes in there. You can get that at the pbnsg.org website as well. And then the second thing I wanted to talk to you about before we get into recipes is fermented food. So I've got a batch of sauerkraut going here. Very simple. I'll give you a little bit of close-up of this lid. I buy this lid and it's got a breather on it from Amazon, so as it bubbles and does its thing, it comes up in here, but it leaves it sealed. It's got a rubber seal here, a rubber seal inside here. This has got a couple of holes in the top. I think you can see that, just to let it breathe, and then it has a breather cap so it just bubbles if it needs to. I also have inside here, get this real close, a glass weight. Both of those items can be purchased very inexpensively on Amazon. And if you want to do something in half-gallon jars, you can get a whole case of them, well, a case of, I believe, 6 at Walmart for about 13 bucks. Fermented food is something that's been around in human nutrition for at least 10,000 years that we can document. It is a way that we preserved food for a very long time. Besides drying, putting in a salt brine was another option to preserve food. And if you think about modern refrigeration, it's really only been around for about 100 years. And over the past 100 years, we have systematically reduced all of the microorganisms that are important to human health and that have, we call it, evolved with us, that we have, as a human species, we've had in our system. But over the last 100 years, we've got modern refrigeration. We cook everything. We can everything. When you can sauerkraut and you get it in a jar in the grocery store, most of the bacteria, because of the heat process, has been killed. So it's, when I say bacteria, part of the reason we do that is to eliminate bad bacteria, but there's good bacteria too. And in particular in sauerkraut and many other fermented vegetables, it's called Lactobacillus reuteri. That particular strain we know is antimicrobial. It helps fight bad bacteria and viruses. And it's just really good for overall gut health. It would be considered a true probiotic. So don't buy the supplements, eat fermented food, do it yourself because it's super, super easy. With my sauerkraut, I literally take and just slice the cabbage up real thin. I put it in a bowl with a little bit of canning salt to let it break down a little bit. I use a tamper and I just smash it down real good. I put it into the jar, and then if I need to add a little bit of salt water brine to it, I can. And I believe that it's 1 tablespoon of salt for 4 cups of water. For this particular, for the sauerkraut that I like, I do a little bit of mustard seed, a little bit of red pepper flakes, and then fennel seed. So it sits on the counter for 2 to 3 weeks. If you want it real sour, it's more like 3 weeks, but I prefer it right about 2 weeks. Fermentation process only takes about 72 hours, and then you can refrigerate it and that bacteria is not going to die. So good stuff, good thing to have in your arsenal of good health, and it's something that your parents and grandparents certainly did, and I would highly recommend implementing fermented food in your diet if you don't already. Kimchi's another one, tempeh's another one. I'm not a fan of yogurt because of the casein in dairy and the casomorphins in dairy that they know can cause cancer to proliferate. So not a fan of cow dairy at all. So some people do yogurt for a probiotic, but I'm telling you, you'll be a lot better off without all the nasty stuff that comes along with that and eating fermented vegetables instead. So today we've got a twofold recipe and a single recipe. Both of them will also be in the video description. One of them is what I call a cucumber bruschetta. So you can put it on whole grain bread, or you can make a pasta salad. It makes a great cold pasta salad. The reason that I chose that for this month's video is that tomatoes are in season, cucumbers are in season, onions are in season, chives are going nuts, basil is going nuts. And then the other thing today that I have fresh out of my garden is Swiss chard, which I love in soups. And usually the farro and bean recipe calls for spinach, but today I'm going to do it with Swiss chard. So it'll be delicious. But we'll show you how I make these, how that's done. So let's get started. Make sure you get a good view of what I'm doing down here. All right, there we go. So first things first, what I have going over here is vegetable broth. Now you can use a low sodium vegetable broth if you want. You can buy that in just about any grocery store. This is what I prefer to use. This is better than bouillon. I can find this on bulk on Amazon for about $6. Just takes about a teaspoon in several cups of water. So I've already got that in here, and I'm going to go ahead and get that started. The second thing that we're going to do is get our pasta rolling for our pasta salad. So I've just got water in here, and we're going to boil that. And then I'm going to show you how to get this stuff cut up efficiently. And we're going to attempt to do it without cutting ourselves. So the first thing that I'm going to start with here is the onion. Both recipes call for a medium white onion. These are kind of small-ish, so I'm going to go ahead and use 1.5 for both recipes. For the farro dish, I can kind of rough chop this. Doesn't need to be real fine or anything. You know, it's more about flavor and having a couple of onion chunks in there. As you noticed, I cut it so it's not on the round and it's not slipping around, and therefore when you're cutting it, it's not going to slip and cause you to cut your fingers. So there's my onion for that. The second thing I'm going to do for the farro bean dish is I'm going to add my garlic and my herbs to this. I use a couple of medium-sized garlic cloves. And before we had talked about using a garlic press to use garlic. Now you can buy minced garlic. You could use garlic powder as well, but for me I prefer the fresh garlic. And then for the recipe, you just flip over to it real quick. It calls for 1/4 cup of fresh basil, so I'm going to just estimate this. Now basil is pretty cool, so I've got so much of it that I'm not afraid to use it. I love the aromaticness of it. But if you kind of roll this up a little bit, it's a little bit easier to cut, and come in and just cut it real thin. And then I go back the other way. And you can do this a number of ways to get this just kind of finely chopped. Now, if you probably noticed from other videos that I happen to like this style of knife, and the reason for it is that it's really nicely balanced in my hand. And when I cut, I keep the tip down and I go like this, and I slide the vegetable through and just, it makes it quick and easy. You have a lot of control that way. So I've got my vegetable broth, my onion, my garlic, my fresh basil. I'll make a mess all over for it. And then the other thing that I have here is I have a teaspoon of oregano, a 1/2 teaspoon of red pepper flake, a 1/2 teaspoon of rosemary. You can use fresh rosemary as well, and a 1/2 teaspoon of whole fennel seeds. So I'm going to go ahead and put these in. Get this stirred in. It smells delicious already. So once this just starts to come to a boil, I'm going to add the farro to it. Now this is what the farro looks like. It's a whole grain. It's very hearty. It's got a lot of protein, or amino acids as it were. You can see this is boiling here. So I'm going to go ahead and add this farro. We're going to bring that to a boil, and then I'll let it simmer for about 20 minutes. Set my kitchen timer. All right, that's boiling. We're going to turn it down so it doesn't boil over. Make sure all of these nice herbs and the garlic and the onion is mixed in there. And then the other thing that I'm going to add is, so you can do this with whole tomatoes. and a 15-ounce can of tomatoes. Now notice this is a no salt added tomato, which I prefer if we're dealing with any heart disease or anything like that. You know you want to go low sodium. There is some sodium in the vegetable broth that I use, but this one happens to be no salt. But alternatively, you could dice fresh tomato, and it's about a cup and a half of fresh tomato for the 15-ounce can. So I'm going to add that, and that's going to give that little bit of tomatoey flavor to the farro. And then I just have 2 ingredients to add to this, and that's chickpeas that are drained and rinsed. You can also get organic and low sodium. And we've got our Swiss chard. So Swiss chard is a little bit more bitter than spinach. If you've never had it, just go with the spinach until you've tried it and decide that you like it. Some people might not, but it's a favorite for me. There are plenty of like lentil Swiss chard soups. There's a farro Swiss chard, and what was it that I saw? I think it was shrimp. All right, so I'm going to set this aside. And we'll put that into our farro bean skillet in a little while. And we'll let that farro cook, and we'll get this in there to wilt nice. And a word on your beans. If you in the recipe, I have that you can use white beans, which is true, you can. But a word of caution on that: you'd want to wait until the end to add the white beans so they don't get mushy in there. One of the reasons why I like to use chickpeas is, for one, I think they taste fantastic, and for two, they're just a little bit heartier and they don't get mushy. So that's my preference. I'm going to grab a bowl real quick. One thing we say in our kitchen is, if you got it, use it. We're not afraid to do dishes here, so we try and use up if we need it, we use it. We're not shy about doing so. So I always have lots of dishes. If I need another utensil, I use it. So all right. So for this cucumber bruschetta, I've got 2 medium cucumbers, and I've already got them peeled. But I'm going to go ahead and get this cut kind of small. I think I'm going to run this way on this as well. Now, when I was saying I cut it like this, the cucumbers are a little bit soft, so it's not pushing as well as I'd like, but you know, it still works pretty well. The main goal of cutting any vegetable is, number one, get it cut. It's kind of therapeutic to me to be chopping in the kitchen, but number two is don't cut yourself. And one of the things that went wrong on the last video is I was using kind of an oversized knife on the tomatoes just because I was in a hurry, and I did cut myself, and that was part of my technical difficulty in getting that out to you, but that's all right. We had to start over. My laptop had been giving me problems, and I wasn't really sure why, and it just kept on and kept on, so I decided to just get a new one because that one's several years old, and looks like the quality on here is real nice, and it's going to be decent quality. So this is all good, and no video with me cutting myself. So last time when I was trying to do a video, because my laptop was giving me problems, I decided to use my phone, and what happened with that was that after about 20 minutes in, it beeped on me and just said, you don't have enough space. So that didn't work out, but that's all right. We're starting over. So for this recipe, the bruschetta slash pasta salad, I'm going to dice this onion a little bit more finely. Now with the cucumber tomato bruschetta, I would, or bruschetta as they say in Italian, you probably want to use a little bit of a sweeter onion versus one that's bitter, because you don't want the onion to overtake all of the other flavors in your dish. All right, so we've got our onion ready. Make sure those are good and separated so you get all of the onion flavors together. I'm going to add a bunch of garlic to this one. Now, if I timed this right, my pasta is going to take about 10 minutes. So this water should be boiling by then, and we'll add the pasta to it. Now, on my garlic press, I've mentioned this before, I always rinse it out and get the sticky stuff out of there so you're not having a fight with it later. All right, so for this recipe, I have some fresh garden chives, and I'm just gonna cut these up real fine. Probably could have done a few more than this. Thought they were a little bigger, but it's all right. So when you use this method of chopping, you gotta push the knife forward just a little bit when it hits the cutting board, just to ensure that it cuts all the way through everything. Just that. And this takes about 10 to 12 large basil leaves. So again, on the basil, 1 second. And this basil, we're going to bunch it up and we're going to roll it. You can do this with parsley too. It works really well for your parsley to kind of keep it together, keep it bunched together. Just a little easier to cut. And you can see that I'm doing like a fine chiffon on this. One of the things that I didn't do is hold a little bit of this out to top our Farro dish. And so I'm going to use a little bit of the chiffon for our Farro. I'll get the rest of this chopped up real fine. And there we have it. I've got a bunch of fresh basil that's going in this. And this will be amazing in a pasta salad and amazing in a bruschetta. Now on a bruschetta, you have a lot of choices when it comes to bread to put it on. And I always encourage a whole grain bread. I think I'm going to use a seeded rye today just for something a little bit different. All right, now it's time to dice up our tomato. I'm using a serrated knife to get through this just a little bit easier. My knife is fairly sharp, but you know how that goes. Check my timer. And put our pasta in. So this pasta is a Del Allo brand, and it's a whole wheat, organic whole wheat pasta. You can buy this at Bush's when it's on sale, $10 I think is what, or I don't know, 3 for $5. I forget what it is. I guess they're beans. So I'll typically use about half the package here. Spoon. Now you don't have to add oil to your pasta. We've talked about this before. You just stir it a couple of times when it's starting out. No oil, no butter needed. We used to always add it so it didn't stick, but come to find out, totally unnecessary. It's unnecessary calories, it's unnecessary fat. And if you're fighting type 2 diabetes like most older Americans are these days, you've got to stay away from the fats. And you may have heard that some people try and do low-carb diets for type 2 diabetes, and I'm going to tell you right now that the only thing that does is it's just like metformin. It just manages symptoms. You might not have blood sugar spikes, but you haven't gotten rid of the problem. The problem when it comes to type 2 diabetes is what they call intramicellular fat lipids. And so what happens to your cells is they get full of fat and have energy. And it's kind of like a lock that's gummed up, that you've got the key for it, but because there's gum in the lock, you can't put the key in. And it's kind of similar. When your cells are full of fat, it's there's a hormonal process that happens, and there's a signaling process that happens with insulin, which is a hormone. And it tells your body that it has too much energy in its cells, too much fat, because fat is energy. It's one source of energy, but it's saying, hey, the cell's full and it doesn't let the insulin in. So when you unpack those cells and burn off that saturated fat, it takes a little doing. You do have to lose some weight. The best way to lose weight is pretty much eating whole plant foods and being in a calorie deficit. With any weight loss, you have to create a calorie deficit, and that's all that low carb diets do, is it puts you in a calorie deficit. But low carb diets are void of fiber, and now that we know what we know about the gut connection to our health and the importance of dietary fiber for all sorts of things, including colorectal cancers, or not getting colorectal cancers, I should say, in a whole host of other metabolic processes, we've got to have fiber, and a gut that is deprived of fiber is not a healthy gut. So what we're going to do here is add our tomatoes. And yes, my hands are clean, so in my kitchen I don't wear gloves for my own food, but if I was cooking for you, I would. All right, so we've got that all together. Now the other thing that we're going to do is add a tablespoon and a half of you can use red wine vinegar, but I do an infused champagne vinegar, and I make my own. This is a garlic rosemary. So it's been aged, it's infused. I've had it for a couple of years now, so it's pretty flavorful. Now, I'm going to give you a slide over here a little bit, and you can see that this Farro dish is coming along. Farro's not done yet. You'll know it when you taste it. It's close to 30 minutes total, but at the 20-minute mark, I'm going to go ahead and add what normally would be spinach, but today we're using Swiss chard and the beans to it. We're waiting on this pasta to cook, probably more than 10 minutes. And in the meantime, here's one other thing that you can do. If you're not salt sensitive, if you're not dealing with hypertension or have vascular disease of any type, which includes type 2 diabetes, which is a vascular disease, if you're not eating a bunch of processed foods, prepackaged foods and that type of thing, you can have, with heart disease, up to 1,400 milligrams of sodium, and 2,300, I believe, is the upper limit for people without metabolic syndrome. So I do add a little bit of salt to this, and that's just so it breaks down the tomato a little bit, and the juices will then flow. And then I go ahead and mix this up really well, because we want to get all of the onions through it. We want to get the basil and the chives and the minced garlic, so it's not in chunks, and it's all the way through this. And then what we're going to do is mix this in with our pasta for a pasta dish, and we can put it as an appetizer. So I made quite a lot today because I'm doing both the pasta and the bruschetta, but this is a really fun appetizer for a party. I've done this a number of times and people just go nuts over it. You just toast off a whole grain baguette that you can get from Bush's or pretty much anywhere anymore. So a nice whole grain baguette that gets toasted. And then after that's toasted, we just spoon on the bruschetta over top, and it is absolutely delicious. So while we're waiting on the pasta and the Farro here, I'm going to go ahead and move a couple things over and get a toast started. That's getting there. All right, so while we're waiting on these, I'm going to put you on pause for just a minute. All right, we're back. So this pasta, if you've not cooked with whole grain pasta before, you'll want to test it often and get it to the point where you want it to be. You want it al dente, not too mushy, and there's a really fine line on whole grain pasta between the al dente and the mushy. This now is done. I'm going to turn this off and I'll cool it in a second. But in the meantime, I'm going to take my fresh Swiss chard and add that into this dish. And then I have my chickpeas here. This is 1 can of rinsed and drained organic low sodium chickpeas. And what you want to do on this particular dish, I'm going to just get you a little closer here, is you want this to have all of your liquids absorbed. So at this point, all I'm doing after that 20-minute, maybe just a couple more than that cook time, I'm going to wilt this Swiss chard in there, and we're going to warm the beans, and that is done and ready to serve. And just so that wilts a little bit faster, I'm going to go ahead and put a lid on it. Now, one of the really cool things about this dish is you get some fantastic nutrients. We know that garlic and onion is cancer fighting, and centenarians eat beans and greens every single day. So you've got your beans, your greens, your onion, your garlic, and berries, which are super helpful. Yes, tomato is a berry, it's a fruit. So I'm going to bring this back for a minute, show you what we have. Here's my toasted grain, whole grain rye. So this would be the bruschetta that you'd serve as an appetizer. You can use the little baguettes. Some people like to use the, oh gosh, I forget the name of those little breads that you can buy frozen and do it that way, but you're better off with a good quality whole grain. I'm going to go ahead and drain and rinse this. So being that this is going to be a whole grain pasta dish, I did rinse it with cold water. I'm going to go ahead and add it to this bowl here. We're going to take our cucumber bruschetta, tomato, onion. I'm going to get a little bit of that vinegar from down in the bottom. It's got the garlic and onions in there. We're going to mix this up. And you can put as little or much in it as you want. You could make more pasta, make a great big dish. Being that my other video kind of messed up, we just had this dish a couple of days ago. So we went a little bit easy on the pasta. So here we go. I'm going to pretty it up a little bit. I'm going to add a nice fresh sprig of basil. And voila, there's your cucumber bruschetta on this here and the pasta. So I'm going to go ahead and refrigerate this and let it get cold and serve it as a cold pasta salad. This you can serve at room temperature, and you know, you want to let it sit for a little while, and the reason for that is so that all the flavors kind of meld together. You've got your garlic, you've got the salt that's breaking down the tomato into a little bit of a sauce. And then, you know, if it's too juicy for you, you can drain that off. You can scoop from the top. You can use a slot, a spoon, whatever you want to do. And you've got a nice little dish there. And, ooh, that smells so good. So we have our Swiss chard, nice and melted in here, or wilted rather than melted. Get our stove off. The liquids are absorbed, the beans are going to be hot, and there it is. So for this is pretty hearty between the whole grains and the chickpeas. It's very filling dish, and you'll find with the fennel and the basil, it's just super aromatic and just absolutely delicious. I'm going to garnish it with a little bit of fresh basil and serve, and that's all there is to it. Really simple. So I try and do these recipes for you guys that are fairly simple. Easy to make, aromatic, one pan, that type of thing. Something that you can do into two different dishes. Anytime you're trying to stick to a really healthy diet, your best bet is to only buy what you're going to cook. Don't buy anything prepackaged. Buy everything, cook it fresh. Cook in batches so that you can freeze them in portions or have it for leftovers, so that when you're really hungry or you're bored or you don't feel like cooking, you're not grabbing a bag of potato chips, you're going to munch on this instead, or an apple or that type of thing. So all of your vegetables, the basil, the Swiss chard, the tomato, the onion, and the cucumber are all available at the local Ypsilanti Farmers Market right now. So get on down there. You know that you can use your SNAP benefit dollars, 2 for 1 there. For every SNAP dollar, you get to buy another dollar worth of vegetables. So great deal. If you don't take advantage of that, do that. So that's it for now. Thanks for listening in. Hope you enjoyed the recipe. Both recipes will be linked in the description, along with a articles that we talked about. So enjoy your day. Thank you so much.